Don't ever call us. The words hung in the chilly morning air, sharper than the antiseptic smell drifting from the building behind me. My daughter Imani didn't even look at me when she said them. She was already half turned, her thumb gliding over the bright screen of her phone, a smirk playing on her lips. She was probably already posting to her social media a picture of the serene entrance to the Golden Years retreat, captioned with some lie about making sure Mama has the best. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. Jaden, her husband, my son-in-law, didn't even grant me the dignity of getting out of the car. He sat in the driver's seat of their new leased sedan, a metallic gray thing that smelled of plastic and arrogance, and just popped the trunk from a button on his dash. His arm was slung over the steering wheel, his gaze flicking between Imani and his own phone. He's the one who added the final punctuation. Yeah, Mama E. Pucklout, his voice dripping with a false jovial familiarity that he knew I despised. We'll call you. And then they laughed, both of them. It wasn't the warm, full-bellied laugh I remembered from Imani's childhood, the one that used to fill our small apartment after a shared joke. This was a new laugh. It was thin, sharp, and cold. It was the sound of a shared cruel secret, the sound of relief, the sound of a burden being dumped. I watched them. I stood on the cracked pavement, my hands still curled around the handle of my single worn-out suitcase. The handle was plastic and it was cutting into my palm. I focused on that feeling, the sharp physical pressure. It was a good anchor, something real to hold onto in the face of their, what? Their casual cruelty, their profound bottomless selfishness. Imani had hauled the suitcase out of the trunk herself. It wasn't heavy, just a few changes of clothes, my toiletries, and the framed photo of her father, my late husband Samuel. She hadn't even looked at me as she dropped it on the curb with a thud. We'll be in touch, Mama, she'd said, the words a hollow echo of a promise she had no intention of keeping. The automatic doors of the nursing home hissed open behind me, breathing out a cloud of air that smelled of boiled vegetables, disinfectant, and a faint underlying note of urinary despair. It was the smell of a place where people came to be forgotten. A place where "don't ever call us" was the unspoken rule for everyone. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. At 35 she was beautiful, but it was a hard, polished beauty. Her hair was perfectly straightened, her clothes were expensive, and her eyes were empty. They were the eyes of her husband Jaden. Calculating, always assessing what someone could do for them, and quickly dismissing them when the answer was nothing. They saw me as just Mom, or more accurately, Mama E, an obligation, a relic from a past they were desperate to scrub away. I was the old woman who lived in a tiny paid-off apartment in a neighborhood they now called transitional. I was the woman who saved tea bags, who mended her own clothes, who smelled of peppermint and old books. I was the free babysitter they no longer needed now that their son, my grandson Kalen, was starting kindergarten. I was in their new shiny leased life, a burden. The car door slammed, the sound final. Imani got in, not even glancing back. The car pulled away from the curb, its tires whispering on the asphalt. I watched it until it turned the corner, its metallic gray shell disappearing behind a row of overgrown hedges. I was alone, they had left me. They had abandoned their mother in a state-funded nursing home with a single suitcase and a parting laugh. I stood there on the curb, the hissing doors of the Golden Years huffing at my back. I felt the cold morning air on my cheeks. I should have felt devastated. I should have felt the sting of tears. I should have felt the crushing weight of abandonment. But I didn't. Instead, I felt a profound, cold calm, a stillness that settled over me like a shroud. Because they had no clue, they had no idea who I really was. They saw the frail, simple old woman. They didn't see the judge. They didn't know I was the sole heir to a $1 million fortune. And they had no idea that they had just, with their final cackling laugh, failed the most important test of their lives. The metallic gray sedan was gone. The silence it left behind was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of a lawnmower and the pneumatic hiss of the nursing home doors. I waited. I counted to 60 just to be sure they weren't going to circle back, having forgotten to give me one last piece of condescending advice. They didn't. They were truly gone. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It wasn't a sigh of sadness. It was a sigh of finality. The end of an act. The $1 million, it was a secret so new it still felt sharp in my mind, like a piece of glass. It had come from my sister Genevieve, my older, estranged, and unbelievably wealthy sister. We hadn't spoken in 30 years, not since my husband Samuel's funeral. Genevieve had flown in from Paris, or perhaps it was Milan that year, dripping in diamonds, and a grief that was as theatrical as it was false. She had looked around my small, clean apartment at the worn furniture and the modest spread of food I'd put out, and she'd sniffed. "Esther," she'd said, her voice a low throaty purr that she'd cultivated to sound like old money. "You always did have a taste for the simple life, it's so quaint." I'd walked her to the door. "Thank you for coming, Genevieve, I'm sure you have a plane to catch." "I do," she'd replied, not missing a beat. She'd paused, her hand on the doorknob, a genuine flicker of something pity, frustration in her eyes. "It didn't have to be this way, Esther. You could have married better, you could have been more." "I am exactly who I want to be," I'd replied, my voice quiet but as hard as her diamonds. "I am a wife, a mother, and I am respected. I have enough." "Enough is the word people use when they're too afraid to want more," she'd snapped, and then she was gone. 30 years passed. 30 years of me living my life, raising Imani, working as a school administrator, saving my pennies and building a life of quiet dignity. 30 years of Genevieve conquering the world, marrying a string of even richer men and becoming a legend in circles I only read about in magazines at the dentist's office. Then 6 months ago a letter had arrived from a law firm, a very expensive law firm in a part of the city I never visited. Genevieve was dead. She had passed away on her yacht in the Mediterranean, and she had left me $1 million. I had stared at the letter for a full hour. It wasn't relief or joy, it was bitterness. $1 million to her, it was probably a rounding error, a last-minute housecleaning of her finances. She had left her billions to foundations and museums, but this one single million she had left to me. I hadn't cried, I had simply folded the letter and put it in my purse. The money was a problem. It was a heavy, complicated thing. It was Genevieve's final judgment, her last attempt to prove that her way, the way of more, was the only one that mattered. She was even from the grave trying to buy my soul, trying to prove that my simple life was a sham and that I too could be bought. She was wrong about me, but I had a sudden sinking feeling that she might be right about my daughter. Imani had her aunt's name in her mouth before she could even walk. Auntie Jen, she'd call her, based on the glossy, expensive Christmas cards that were the only contact we'd had. Imani had inherited Genevieve's hunger, but not her drive or her brilliance. Imani just had the want, and Jaden was a parasite who had sensed that want in her and latched on, amplifying it, feeding it. The money was a weapon. I knew that Genevieve had left me a loaded gun to see what I would do with it. Would I spend it? Would I hoard it? Would I let it change me? I stood on that curb, the smell of boiled cabbage stinging my nose, and I finally understood. The money wasn't for me. It was a tool. It was a light, and I was going to use it to shine into the darkest corners of my daughter's heart, to see what, if anything, was left. My life, the one I had built with my own 2 hands, was a fortress of routine and quiet dignity. For 40 years I was an administrator at the local high school. Not a teacher, not a principal, but the woman who ran the place. I was the one who knew every budget line, every student file, every maintenance issue. I was the one the principals leaned on, the one the teachers came to when they had a real problem. It was a life of public service, of meticulous records and small daily kindnesses. It didn't pay much, but it paid in respect. When I walked down the street, my old students, now parents, police officers, shop owners, would nod. "Mrs. Esther," they'd say, their voices warm. That was my wealth. My apartment was my sanctuary. Samuel and I had bought it in the 70s, a small 2-bedroom in a solid brick building. Now the neighborhood was transitional, which was a polite word for gentrified. Young loud people like Imani and Jaden were moving in, tearing down walls and putting up cold gray furniture. My apartment was the opposite. It smelled of my kitchen, cinnamon, roasting chicken, old books and lemon oil. The furniture was the same we'd always had, a comfortable overstuffed sofa, Samuel's reading chair, bookshelves overflowing with novels and histories. Every object had a story. I raised Imani in that apartment. I tried to teach her what Samuel and I believed in. That character was more important than cash. That integrity was the only currency that mattered. That you measured a person not by the car they drove, but by the promises they kept. She seemed to be listening for a while. Then she'd met Jaden in college. He was all flash, he consulted, that was his job. A vague, slippery word that meant he moved money around and produced nothing. He wore suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, which I'd paid off in 1998, and spoke in a language of synergy and leveraging assets. He saw my Imani, and he saw an asset to be leveraged. He saw her ambition, her hunger for the life her Auntie Jen lived, and he molded it. They married. I'd paid for the wedding, draining a significant portion of my savings to give her the day she deserved. They'd moved into a glass and chrome apartment I hated visiting. It had no soul, there were no books, the sofas were low and hard, designed for looking, not for sitting. Then came Kalen, my grandson, and for a few years I had my daughter back. She needed me, she needed mama. I was the babysitter, I was the one who knew how to get him to sleep. The one who made the soup when he was sick. I didn't mind, I loved Kalen, I loved having a purpose in their lives again, even if it was an unpaid on-call one. But I watched them, I watched how they spent. They were drowning in debt, but it was invisible debt. The new sedan every 2 years leased, always leased. The designer clothes for Kalen, who would outgrow them in a month. The dinners, the vacations, the endless stream of things they deserved. They were living a life they couldn't afford, financed by a future they never planned for. And they were always broke. Mama, can you spot us for the electric bill? Jaden's check is late. Mama, Kalen needs this new tablet for school. Can you help us out? I always did. With my small pension, with my careful savings, I helped, because that's what a mother does. But I was growing a cold hard knot of resentment in my stomach. I wasn't helping, I was enabling. I was feeding the very beast I had tried to starve. I was teaching them that I was a safety net, a resource to be tapped, not a person to be loved. I saw the way they looked at my simple apartment, my mended coat. Not with respect for my frugality, but with embarrassment. I was their dowdy poor mother, a living breathing reminder of a struggle they felt they were too good for. My simple life was a conscious choice. It was my philosophy, my religion. It was my monument to Samuel, to a life lived with honor. To them it was just a sign that I had failed. The day I met with Genevieve's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, was a rainy Tuesday. His office was on the 50th floor. A place of hushed carpets, dark wood, and windows that looked down on the city like the eye of God. Harrison was an older man, precise and dry, like a character from a Dickens novel. He had been Genevieve's fixer for decades. He explained the inheritance, the $1 million, and then he read the clause. This final bequest, he read, his voice monotone, I leave to my sister Esther, who always prided herself on having enough. I leave her this more to do with as she pleases. My only stipulation is this, that she use it to find in her world who is truly worthy. If she finds no one, she is to burn it. I don't care. I'd sat there stunned. Burn it? A figure of speech, Harrison had said, a small dry smile touching his lips. Genevieve was theatrical. She means you are not to give it to a charity or a foundation. She despised organized giving. She called it a way for the rich to feel good about being rich. No, this is for you. A test. A final cynical game from a very cynical woman. She thinks I'll spend it on myself. I'd whispered. She thinks I'll finally break, buy a fur coat and a fancy car. Or, Harrison had offered, leaning forward, she's testing your daughter. The words hit me like a physical blow. Of course, Genevieve knew about Imani. She'd seen the hunger in her even as a child. This wasn't a test for me. It was a trap for Imani. Genevieve from the grave was about to prove her point, that everyone, even my own daughter, was greedy, grasping, and unworthy. I'd left the office in a daze. For a week I did nothing. The money sat in an account, a sleeping dragon. I was furious at Genevieve's arrogance, at her assumption that my family was as broken as hers. And then, a plan began to form. A cold, hard, and terrible plan. What if Genevieve was right? I had been enabling Imani and Jaden for years, blinded by my own love. What if I used my sister's cynical game for my own purpose? Not as a trap, but as a crucible. A final fiery test to burn away the lies and see what, if anything, remained. I would not just pretend to be poor. I would become a burden. I would become the person they secretly feared I was, a broke, desperate old woman with nowhere to go. I would use Genevieve's $1 million to build a stage. And on this stage I would give my daughter and her husband one final chance to show me who they really were. I called Mr. Harrison. The money, I said, my voice firm. I'm going to need you to move it. All of it. I'm going to need you to find me a new place to live, under a different name, and I'm going to need your discretion. There was a pause. A game, Miss Esther? He'd asked. No, Mr. Harrison, I'd replied, the coldness settling into my bones. A lesson. He helped me. We found the penthouse, a corporate rental under a holding company name. We set up new accounts, and we kept my little brick apartment, my home, as the stage. The test was on. The first thread I wove into my web of deception was my job. I had in fact retired from my full-time administrator role 5 years ago. But I'd kept a small part-time job in the school library, mostly for my own sanity. It gave me a place to go, a purpose. Amani and Jaden knew this. They called it my little hobby. I chose a Sunday dinner a month after my meeting with Harrison to set the first snare. I'd invited them to my apartment, cooking Samuel's favorite, a slow-roasted chicken with rosemary and lemon. They'd arrived late, as usual, already bickering about parking. "Smells good, Mama," Imani had said, kissing the air near my cheek while she texted. Jaden just grunted and headed for the living room, immediately turning on the football game, his feet on my coffee table. I waited until we were eating. "I have some, well, it's difficult news," I'd said. My voice, I'd practiced this, a little frail, a little shaky. Imani looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "What is it, Mama?" "The school, they're making cuts, downsizing. My little job in the library, well, it's gone." I'd picked at my food, not looking at her. There was a silence. Not, "Oh Mama, I'm so sorry." Not, "Are you okay?" The silence was the sound of rapid mental calculation. I could hear them thinking. My job, $500 a month. $500 a month she used for her own bills. $500 a month she won't have. "Oh, that's terrible, Mama," Jaden said, his eyes still on the TV. "Really? But hey, you've been working forever. Time to enjoy retirement, right? You can watch Kaylin more." "Actually, Jaden," Imani said, her voice tight, "that's the other thing. Kaylin is starting that new STEM program. It's very expensive. We're going to be a little tight." "Oh," I'd said, playing my part, "I see." The first test and they'd failed. My news wasn't a concern, it was an inconvenience, a potential drain on their resources that they were already preemptively cutting off. I gave it 2 weeks. Then I set the second snare. I called Imani on a Wednesday. "Honey, I'm a little worried. You know, my building was sold last year. The new owners, they're raising the rent. A lot." This was a lie, of course. My apartment was paid off. But they didn't know that. They assumed I was a renter like them. "How much, Mama?" Her voice was flat. I'd plucked a number out of the air, a number I knew would scare her. There, a long heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "Mama, this is really bad timing. His commissions are down. We just can't help right now. You're going to have to figure something out." "Figure something out?" I'd repeated, letting my voice tremble. "Imani, I'm scared." "We're all scared, Mama," she'd snapped, her patience gone. "We all have problems. Look, I have to go. Kaylin needs something. Just look at your finances, see what you can cut. We'll talk later." She'd hung up. I'd sat in my comfortable paid-for apartment, listening to the dial tone. I didn't feel sadness, I felt the last flicker of my maternal hope die. It was a cold, quiet death. And in its place something new was born. Not anger, just certainty. I now knew exactly what I was dealing with. A week after my panicked phone call about the rent, they visited. It was a transparent tactical maneuver. They hadn't come to offer help, they'd come to do damage control, to assess the threat level. They arrived on a Saturday afternoon, Kaylin in tow, which they only did when they wanted to soften me up. "Hey Mama," Imani said, all false brightness, pushing Kaylin towards me. "Look who wanted to see his grandma." Kaylin, who was a sweet boy, ran and gave me a hug. I held him tight, breathing in the smell of him, a small innocent soul caught in a den of vipers. Jaden, meanwhile, was not in the living room. He was helpfully inspecting my apartment. He was in my bedroom. He was in my study. He came back into the living room, a thoughtful, appraising look on his face. He looked like a vulture calculating the remaining meat on a carcass. "Mama," he said, sitting in Samuel's chair, an act of desecration he performed every time he visited. "Imani and I have been talking, and we just want to help you leverage your assets. You're sitting on a lot of trapped value here." I'd feigned confusion. "Trapped value? Jaden, I don't understand." "This stuff," he'd said, waving his hand around my living room. "My life, it's all—" "This is my furniture, Jaden," I'd said, my voice small. This was Samuel's." Right, he'd said, dismissively. "And he'd want you to be secure, right? He wouldn't want you to be rent-stressed. We're just saying, you could sell some of this clutter and streamline your life, get some cash flow." Imani had chimed in, her voice all smooth and reasonable. "He's right, Mama, it's just things. You could get a nice new modern sofa, something cleaner, and Tuan and Mama." She'd walked over to me, her eyes landing on my left hand, on my wedding ring, a simple gold band, and the small clear diamond Samuel had saved for a year to buy me. I'd instinctively covered my hand with my other. "Imani, no. I'm just saying," she'd said, her voice rising. It's probably worth a lot. You could pay your new rent for a year with that. You don't even go anywhere. Why do you need to wear it? It's just sitting there. I'd stared at her. My daughter, the child I had nursed, the child I had read to, the child whose tears I had dried. And she was standing in my living room, asking me to sell my wedding ring, to sell my past, my love, my identity, to pay a fictional rent hike I had invented. But Jaden wasn't done. He'd walked over to my mantel where the framed photo of Samuel sat next to his old pocket watch. It hadn't worked in 20 years, but I wound it every Sunday just to hear the click. Now this, Jaden said, picking it up, an old timepiece like this could fetch a pretty penny. There are collectors for this junk. He'd called it junk. He'd held my husband's memory in his slick, grasping hands and called it junk. I'd felt a sudden icy rage so cold and so pure it almost made me dizzy. I'd wanted to snatch the watch from him, to order them out of my house, to tell them everything. But I didn't. I was an actor now, and the play was not over. I'd put a tremor in my voice. Please, Jaden, put it down. That is all I have left of him. He'd shrugged, putting it down with a careless clack. Suit yourself, Mama E, just trying to help, just trying to problem solve. But you can't help people who don't want to be helped. They'd left soon after, their duty done. They had come not to offer a hand, but to survey my belongings, to see what they could advise me to liquidate. They didn't want to give me anything, they wanted to take more. They wanted to strip me of my memories, of my dignity, of the last vestiges of my life with some wall. That was the night I truly knew. They weren't just selfish, they were ghouls. And they were lost. After the horrifying visit to appraise my belongings, I let the silence stretch. I didn't call them, I let them stew. I knew how their minds worked. My problem was a loose thread, an annoying notification they couldn't dismiss. My silence, my failure to solve my own problem, would be a growing source of irritation. 2 weeks later, on a Friday night, I made the call. I'd been practicing. I'd rubbed a slice of onion under my eyes, just enough to make them water, just enough to make my voice thick. Imani, I'd whispered into the phone. Mama, what's wrong? You sound weird. She sounded annoyed. I had clearly interrupted something. I could hear music in the background, the clinking of glasses. They were out. It's the eviction notice, I'd lied, letting a sob, a truly masterful one, if I do say so myself, break my voice. It came today. They're giving me 30 days. I'm being evicted. The silence on the other end was absolute. The music, the clinking, everything seemed to stop. I heard her muffled voice. Jaden, it's my mother. She's being evicted. I heard his answering groan. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. Imani came back on the line. Her voice was no longer annoyed. It was dead. A cold, flat, panicked tone. Mama, you can't be. Are you sure? I'm holding it in my hand, I'd cried. I don't know what to do. I have nowhere to go. Imani, honey, I'm going to have to move in with you. Just for a little while. Just until I can get on my feet. I'll sleep on the sofa. I won't be any trouble. No. The word was so fast, so sharp. It was like a slap. What? I'd whispered. No, Mama, you can't, she'd stammered, trying to recover. We don't have the space, you know that. Our apartment, it's not set up for that. And Kalen, it would disrupt his routine. I'd be homeless, Imani, I'd said, letting the words hang in the air. Your mother, homeless. Don't do that, Mama, she'd hissed. Don't try to guilt me. This is not my fault. You should have planned better. You should have sold that stuff like we said. I heard Jaden's voice, low and urgent. Baby, calm down, let me handle this. Give me the phone. There was a scuffle, and then Jaden's slick, false calm voice was in my ear. Mama E, listen to me. Imani she's just upset. We are not going to let you be homeless. Okay? We are not those kinds of people. Oh, but you are, I'd thought. You are exactly those kinds of people. Imani and I, he'd continued, his voice oozing with a sudden brilliant solution. We were just talking, just in case this happened. We've been doing some research. We found this wonderful community for you. A retreat for seniors. It's beautiful. It's got activities and meals and other people your age. It's state funded. It's perfect. It's all you can afford. He was so proud of himself. He had found a loophole. He had found a place to put me. A nursing home? I'd asked, my voice trembling with what he assumed was fear. No, he'd said, laughing. It's not a nursing home, Mama E. It's a golden years retreat. It's like a resort. You'll love it. We'll come and visit all the time. A lie. I don't know, I'd stammered. It's the only way, Mama. Imani's voice cut in. She must have grabbed the phone back. Her voice was hard again. The solution had been presented. It's this or a shelter. We'll take you on Monday. We'll get you all packed. And just like that, my fate was sealed. They had found a place to dump me. A state-funded home for the indigent elderly. The relief in their voices was palpable. It was a bright, shining, ugly thing. They had solved their mother problem. Okay, I'd whispered after a long pause. I'd hung up the phone. The onions were long forgotten. The tears were no longer faked. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of a cold, profound rage. The play was set. The final act was about to begin. The car ride to the retreat was the longest, loudest, and most agonizing silence of my life. They'd arrived at my apartment at 9 a.m. sharp. Not to help me pack, as Imani had promised, but to get it over with. I had my one small suitcase waiting by the door. I had already weeks before moved everything I truly cherished. My photos, Samuel's letters, my mother's jewelry into a secure box at Mr. Harrison's office. The apartment they were clearing out was nothing but a stage set of furniture which Harrison's team would liquidate after I left. Imani had walked in, her eyes scanning the living room. This is it? This is all you're bringing? It's all I'll need. I'd said softly. Fine, she'd snapped. Less for us to clear out, I guess. She'd turned to Jaden. See? I told you we could get it done in one car. You didn't need to rent that stupid truck. I was just planning, baby, he'd said, already annoyed. Planning for her junk. They'd bickered all the way down the stairs. I'd followed behind them carrying my own suitcase. Jaden hadn't offered to take it. He was too busy carrying his phone. I'd sat in the back seat of their car like a child or a dog. The leather was new and slick. Kalen was not there. We didn't want to upset him. Imani had offered as if his absence were a kindness. The truth was, they didn't want a witness. They didn't want their son to see them abandon his grandmother. Jaden turned on the radio. Loud. Some pounding, soulless music. He was driving too fast, weaving through traffic. He was a man trying to outrun an obligation. Imani was in the passenger seat, her head bent, her thumb a blur over her phone. Tap 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 swipe, tap 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 swipe. She was, I realized, live posting this, the hard journey. The sacrifices we make for family. I could already imagine the carefully curated #blessed lies. They spoke over me. Not to me but over me as if I were a piece of luggage, as if I were already gone. I'm so glad this is done. Imani had sighed, loud enough for me to hear. Now we can finally breathe, we can even think about moving. Get Kalen into that better school district. I told you, baby. Jaden had replied, his voice smug. Once we unlocked this problem, everything else would fall into place. Now we can get her apartment cleared out. That vintage stuff, I'm telling you, Mania, there's a market. We could probably clear 10-15,000. I'd closed my eyes. They were planning to sell my life, to sell Samuel's chair, my books, our bed. They were already spending the money. And Imani had added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We can finally, redo the guest room. Make it the Peloton room you wanted. The guest room. The room I'd disrupted by asking to sleep on their sofa. They were going to turn it into an exercise room. I'd said nothing. I just sat. I let their words, their greed, their casual, breathtaking cruelty wash over me. I absorbed it. I let it settle into my bones. This was the crime. This was the final, irrefutable proof. This was the memory I would need to hold on to keep my resolve firm. We'd pulled up to the curb, the Golden Years retreat. It was worse than the brochure. It was a flat gray cinderblock building. The serene hedges were overgrown, dotted with litter. The automatic doors, the hissing, the smell of cabbage. Imani had gotten out. Jaden had popped the trunk. She'd hauled out my suitcase, dropped it. Thud. She'd turned to me, her phone in her hand, that bright, false media-ready smile plastered on her face, ready for a selfie I'm sure she was planning to take. Well, here you are, Mama, home. And then the final, fatal words. We'll be in touch, Mom. Yeah, just don't ever call us, we'll call you. The laugh. The slam of the door, the whisper of the tires. And the silence. This was the moment the test ended, the moment the verdict came in, the moment my daughter and her husband, in their desperate, grasping, selfish short-sightedness, had set fire to their own lives. And they didn't even have the decency to know it. I stood on that curb. The gray sedan was gone. The world was quiet save for the hum of the lawnmower. The automatic doors of the Golden Years retreat hissed open. A woman in pale green scrubs, her face set in a permanent look of exhausted apathy, came out. She held a clipboard. "Esther," she'd asked, her voice flat, not even looking up from her list. "We've been expecting you. Let's get your paperwork." I didn't move, I just stood, my hand on my suitcase. The nurse aide looked up, annoyed. "Ma'am, Esther, did you hear me? We have to process you. Let's go." I held up a single finger, my index finger, not in a rude way, but in a quiet, firm weight gesture that I had used for 40 years to silence rowdy teenagers and rambling school board members. The nurse aide stopped. She blinked. The gesture, the authority of it, was so out of place with the indigent, abandoned woman she was expecting to process that it threw her off. "One moment," I said. My voice was different. The frail, shaky old woman was gone. My voice was clear, crisp, and cold. The voice of a school administrator who was not to be trifled with. I opened my handbag, my worn old handbag. Inside, nestled next to a packet of peppermints, was not the simple 10-year-old flip phone Imani thought I owned. It was an iPhone, the newest one, sleek, black, and expensive. The nurse aide's eyes widened. She saw the phone, it did not compute. With a practiced, steady thumb I tapped the screen. I went to my favorites. I tapped the first name. Mr. Harrison. It rang once. "Esther." His voice came through, as dry and precise as ever. "Is it done?" "Phase 1 is complete, Harrison," I said, my voice low and clear. I looked straight ahead at the litter-strewn hedge. The test subjects, they failed, spectacularly. The nurse aide's mouth was quite literally open. She was staring at me, at the phone, at the empty curb. "I am so very sorry to hear that," Harrison said, and I knew he meant it. He was a good man. He, like me, had hoped for a different outcome. "It was necessary," I replied. "I'm at the location. Can you bring the car around?" "I'm 2 blocks away, Miss Esther," he'd said. "I've been observing as you requested." "Good," I said. I hung up. I did not tap the end button. I pressed it with a final decisive click. I slipped the phone back into my handbag. I looked at the nurse aide. Her name tag said Brenda. "Brenda," I said, my voice now kind, but firm. "I apologize for the confusion. I will not be processing today. My family made a mistake, a clerical error. I will not be staying." Brenda was speechless. She just pointed. But, your daughter, the paperwork, it said, state funded." "My daughter," I said, "is mistaken about a great many things." And as I said it, a new car whispered up to the curb. It was not a leased sedan, it was a Mercedes. A heavy black S-Class. The kind of car that doesn't drive, it arrives. It was old money, it was silent, it was power. Brenda took a half step back, as if the car itself had intimidated her. The driver's door opened, and Mr. Harrison got out. He was not a young man, but he was immaculate, a dark, perfectly tailored suit, a crisp white shirt. He walked around the car not with the hurried, anxious energy of Jaden, but with a slow, deliberate grace. He came to the back door. He opened it. Then he turned to me. He did not grab my bag. He did not tell me to hurry up. He simply stood by the open door, his hand slightly extended. "Miss Esther," he said, his voice just loud enough for Brenda to hear. "I am so sorry you had to endure that. Shall we go home?" I looked at Brenda. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. But, I gave her a small, sad smile. "Have a lovely day, Brenda." I turned. I left my suitcase on the curb, the one with my old life in it. I walked to the black sedan. Mr. Harrison held the door. I slid into the back seat. The leather was real. It was soft, and it smelled of nothing. Harrison closed the door with a solid, satisfying thunk. Brenda was still standing there, clipboard in hand, her mouth open as the black sedan pulled away from the Golden Years retreat, leaving my single worn-out suitcase sitting on the curb, a monument to the life I had just finally left behind. The back of the Mercedes was a world away from the back of Jaden's leased sedan. It was not a back seat, it was a compartment. The windows were tinted, turning the drab gray morning of the suburbs into a muted cinematic landscape. The silence was absolute. I couldn't hear the engine. I couldn't hear the traffic. I could only hear the quiet click of the turn signal. Mr. Harrison was driving. He didn't speak. He was a professional. He understood that I needed a moment. I looked at my hands resting in my lap. They were not trembling. I had expected them to tremble. I had expected something. A wave of grief. A tremor of regret. But there was nothing. Just a vast, cold and empty stillness. The stillness of a battlefield after the smoke has cleared. "The suitcase, Harrison," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. "It will be disposed of, Miss Esther," he replied, his eyes on the road. "Along with everything else in the apartment. The liquidation team is already there. By noon the stage, as you called it, will be gone." "Good," I said. I thought of my suitcase, the old worn-out clothes, the picture of Samuel. I had duplicates of the photos. I had the real memories. The rest was just stuff, as Jaden would say. He was right about that at least. It was just junk. We drove for 20 minutes, leaving the world of cinder block retreats and strip malls behind. We drove into the city. The real city. The one of glass and steel and money. We pulled into an underground garage, all polished concrete and bright white lights. Harrison parked in a reserved spot. He came around, opened my door. "Welcome home, Miss Esther," he said. He led me to a private elevator. He used a key. The elevator rose fast and silent. My ears popped. We were going up. The doors opened, not into a hallway, but directly into a home. "This," I whispered. "The penthouse, Miss Esther," Harrison said, gently taking my coat. "As you instructed. A 6-month lease, paid in full under the Genevieve LLC. It has been your primary residence for the last 6 weeks. The Tulite apartment was just for the performance." I walked forward. The performance, that's what it had been, and I was, it turned out, a very, very good actor. The apartment, it was magnificent. The entire wall in front of me was glass, looking out over the city. The city I had just driven through was now a map, a toy, spread out at my, and it smelled like me. "Your personal collection, Miss Esther," Harrison said. "We moved them from the old apartment before the test began, along with your personal papers, your photographs, and your clothing." He opened a closet door, and there was my life, my real life, my simple mended cardigans, my comfortable shoes, my old worn-out copy of Middlemarch. But next to them were new things. Things Harrison had procured. A beautiful cashmere wrap. A set of leather-bound journals. I had been living here in this palace in the sky for 6 weeks. Every Sunday I would leave, take a cab to my old apartment and perform for my family. I would be the woman they expected. The worried, frail, broke old woman. And then, I would come back here, to the silence, to the view, to plan my next move. This was Genevieve's world. This was the more she had always talked about. And I was good at this. I had a talent for it. The subterfuge, the planning, the cold, clear-eyed execution of a strategy. I had run a school district for 40 years. This was no different. Just a different budget. It's perfect, Harrison," I said, turning from the window. "I'm glad you approve," he said. He was holding a leather briefcase. He opened it. "Now there is one more piece of paperwork, the final act of the test." He pulled out a sheaf of documents. "Your new and final last will and testament." The study was a room of dark wood and quiet. Unlike the rest of the penthouse, which was all light and air, this room was an anchor. It was a room for making decisions. Mr. Harrison laid the documents on the heavy mahogany desk. He clicked his pen. "Are you certain, Miss Esther?" he asked, his voice soft. "This is irrevocable." I sat in the high-backed leather chair. I looked at the top page. The last will and testament of Esther Sterling. My name, my full name, not Mama E. Esther. "I am more than certain, Harrison," I said. "I am at peace." "Very well," he said. He walked me through it, though I already knew what it said. I had drafted it with him, line by line, over the last 6 weeks. My old will had been simple. Everything, my apartment, my pension, my small savings, went to Imani. It was a mother's will. This was a matriarch's will. "You will see here," Harrison said, pointing, "that the full inheritance from your sister Genevieve, the $1 million which has, with investments, already grown to 1.2 billion. My grandson, my sweet innocent Kaelin. He will be the sole beneficiary," I said, reading the words I had written. "He will be," Harrison confirmed, "with conditions. And this—" I nodded. "Read the conditions, Harrison. Read them out loud. I want to hear them. I want to be sure." He cleared his throat. "The Kaelin Sterling Trust," he read, "shall remain locked and inaccessible to the beneficiary Kaelin until his 30th birthday." "Good," I said. "He needs to be a man. He needs to be free of them. Upon his 30th birthday, Harrison continued, Mr. Kalen Sterling may petition for access. Access will be granted only if he can prove, to the satisfaction of the trust's executor. That's you, Harrison, I'd interjected. To the satisfaction of the executor, he'd repeated, that he is financially and emotionally independent from his parents, Imani and Jaden. He must not, I repeat, not, have any commingled finances, shared accounts or shared property with them. He must be, and I'd prompted, and, should Mr. Kalen Sterling fail to meet these conditions by his 30th birthday, the testing period will be extended. Should he never meet them, upon his 40th birthday, the full trust and all its accrued interest will be dissolved and donated in its entirety to the Samuel Sterling Scholarship Fund at his grandmother's old school. It was a clean cut, a surgical incision. And Imani? I'd asked, though I already knew. Harrison turned the page. To my daughter Imani and her husband Jaden, I leave, he'd paused. I leave the sum of $1 starler and a copy of this my final letter. I leave them my forgiveness and my pity. For they have proven they know the price of everything and the value of nothing. I'd picked up the pen, it was heavy, it was cold. Esther, Harrison said, his hand on the document. One last time, are you sure? He is your grandson, but she is your daughter. I'd looked up at him, I'd thought of the car ride, the Peloton room, the junk, the laugh. I am not punishing them, Harrison, I'd said, my voice as cold and clear as the view from my window. I am releasing them. They are so burdened by what they think they are owed, by what they deserve. Now they are free, they are unburdened, they have only themselves. Let's see what they build with that. I'd signed my name, Esther Sterling. It was done. The last tie was cut, the last thread was woven. Now, I'd said, standing up, I believe I would like a cup of tea. And then, I'm going to read Middlemarch. I let 3 weeks pass. 3 weeks of peace. I woke up in the penthouse. I watched the sunrise paint the city in hues of orange and pink. I read, I thought. I walked through the city not as Mama E, the broke old lady, but as Miss Esther Sterling, a woman of means, a woman of interest. I went to museums. I went to the symphony. I lived. I did not call them. And as I had known they would, they did not call the Golden Years retreat to check on me. Why would they? The problem was solved. But I knew them, I knew their habits, I knew their finances. Their leased life was expensive and their cash flow was a problem. The panic, I calculated, would begin on the 28th of the month, the day before their sedan's lease payment was due. Of course they didn't call me, they couldn't. They called the retreat. Brenda, the nurse aide, had, as I'd requested and I must admit paid for via Mr. Harrison, kept a log. Call at 4:30 p.m., her notes read. From a Jaden, asking for Esther, was agitated. I informed him per protocol that Miss Esther Sterling was never a resident at this facility. I could picture it, the sputtering confusion, the sputtering rage. He shouted. Brenda's notes continued. He said, what do you mean she's not a resident? I dropped her off. I informed him per protocol that we have no record of that. The next call I knew would be to my old number. I'd had it disconnected. Be-do boop. This number is no longer in service. Be-do boop. The panic would be escalating. The annoyance would be turning to cold, sharp fear. The next step, the drive. The dawning, sickening horror as they drove back to my old neighborhood. Back to the apartment they had already, in their minds, liquidated. They would have pulled up, they would have seen lights. They would have seen new curtains. Not my curtains. Mr. Harrison's liquidation team had been efficient. The apartment, my old apartment, had been cleared and sold in 14 days. A cash buyer. I'd bought my own apartment through the LLC, just to be tidy. A new family was in it. A young couple, actors. Mr. Harrison had arranged them, hired for the week. Imani and Jaden would have buzzed the intercom. The new tenant would have answered. Can I help you? We're looking for Esther, the old lady who lived here. Oh, her. No, she's gone. Sold the place months ago. Months. The lie that would hit them. The eviction. The rent. The lost job. All of it. A lie. She played us. The panic would morph, it would become rage, but also fear. Because if Mama was gone, so was the bank. So was the safety net. So was the solution to their cash flow problem. They were finally and completely alone. They found Harrison, of course. It wouldn't have been hard. A consultant like Jaden would know how to search public records, to find the lawyer who had signed the sale papers for my apartment. They would have stormed his office, demanding, entitled, "Where is Our Mother?" I'd asked Harrison to record it, for legal purposes, I'd said. He'd reluctantly agreed. I watched it, that evening on the large smart TV in my penthouse as I sipped a cup of tea. They'd burst in. Imani, her hard polished beauty, cracked. Her hair was messy. Jaden, his expensive suit rumpled. They looked desperate. "Where is she?" Imani had shrieked. "What did you do with our mother?" Jaden had tried to bluster. We know you handled the sale. You know where she is. We're her family. We have rights." "Rights," Harrison had said, his voice a calm, cool river. He hadn't stood, he was expecting them. "Please, sit." They didn't. "We don't want to sit," Jaden had yelled. "We want our mother." "No," Harrison had said, his voice quiet but it cut through the noise. "No, you don't. You want her money." The silence in the room, even on the video, was deafening. "Miss Esther," Harrison had continued, "was prescient. She knew you would come. She left this for you." He'd slid it across the desk, a single high-quality ivory envelope, with their names on it, Imani and Jaden. Imani's hand shook as she tore it open. She read it. Her face went white, chalk white. "What?" Jaden snatched it from her. He read it aloud, his voice a hoarse, disbelieving whisper. "Dear Imani and Jaden, I am writing this to inform you that 6 months ago I inherited $1 million from my sister Genevieve." Jaden's voice cracked. $1 million. He kept reading. "I did not need the money, but I feared that you did. I feared that you had lost your way. So I devised a test. A simple test of character. I became the person you always saw me as. A poor, old, desperate burden." He looked up at Harrison, at Imani, his face gray. He continued. "You failed. You failed in every conceivable way. You were not just unwilling to help. You were eager to profit. You tried to sell my past. You threw me away. You laughed." Imani was sobbing now, real racking sobs. No, no les. Jaden couldn't stop, he kept reading, his voice breaking. "The $1 million is gone. It is in a trust. For Kalen. A trust that you can never touch. He will be free of you, and your greed. As for you, I leave you exactly what you deserve. I leave you to each other. I leave you to your leases and your debts, and your empty lives. And finally, I leave you with your own words. The last ones you ever spoke to me." Jaden's voice was a choked gasp. "Don't ever call us. We'll call you. I assure you I will not be calling, and I have made certain that you will have no reason left in the world to ever call me. Goodbye." The paper, it fluttered from Jaden's hand. He looked at Imani, but not with love, not with sympathy. He looked at her with pure, unadulterated hate. "You," he hissed, "this is your fault. Your stupid old mother, she $1 million and you threw it away for a Peloton room." He left. He stormed out of the office, slamming the door. Imani didn't follow. She just slid down the wall, onto the expensive carpet. She sat there, a broken woman in a lawyer's office with nothing left but her regret. I watched the video end. I turned off the TV. The penthouse was silent. I walked to the window, the city sparkled below. I had won. But I felt no joy. Just the cold, hard and empty peace of a lesson that had been taught. A lesson that had cost me everything. Except my soul. Thank you for watching.